Hey, it's Nathan. Before you settle in, I want to tell you why this one sat with me longer than most. We keep hearing that the camera is harmless, that a phone pointed at a kid is just a memory being saved. But somewhere in the last 10 years, a certain kind of family figured out that a child's worst day pays better than her best one, and that a channel is a business, and that a business needs product. This is a story about a man who was on the other side of the planet when he learned his little girl had become someone's product. She is deaf, her first language is her hands, and people who were supposed to love her turned those hands into a bit for the algorithm. I'm not going to pretend this is an easy watch, but stay with it, because it isn't really about cruelty. It's about a quiet man who thinks in signals and patterns for a living, and what happens when he stops treating a monster like a fight and starts treating it like a network. It's about how you take a machine built to hurt one child and turn it into the exact thing that convicts everyone who built it. Names and details are changed, but the shape of it is real enough to matter. Let's get into it. Rhys Denman had learned to read a room by its wiring. It was a habit 14 years in the army had beaten into him, first as a young signals soldier stringing antennas in places with no names, later as the sergeant everyone called when a network went dark and a mission was bleeding minutes. He could walk into any building and feel where the power ran, where the signal pooled and where it died, which wall was hiding a cable and which was just a wall. People thought it was a gift. It wasn't. It was attention. Rhys simply refused to look away from the boring parts, and the boring parts were where everything was hidden. The one thing that had ever made him look away was Sylvie. She was born in a hospital in Cavell, Nevada, on a February morning, while Rhys was 9 time zones east, listening to her come into the world through a satellite phone held to his ear by a chaplain. She failed her newborn hearing screen. She failed it again a month later. By the time Rhys got home, the audiologist had the word ready: profound, bilateral. And Rhys had already decided the only thing that mattered was that he would never make his daughter live in a house where she couldn't understand her own father. So he learned. Badly at first, then well. American Sign Language became the second thing his hands knew how to do under pressure. He and Sylvie built a private country of two, with its own jokes, its own signs that meant nothing to anyone else. Their sign for I love you was 3 taps on the back of the other's hand. Quick, like a heartbeat you could pass between palms. Danae had learned the signs too, in the beginning. Rhys wanted to believe that meant something. He had met Danae Marrow at a wedding when he was 26, and she was the most alive person in any room she entered. The Marrows were Cavell royalty, in the small way that mid-sized desert towns have royalty. A family that had turned a single furniture store into a scattering of businesses, and a name people said with a little too much respect. Danae's father, Grover, ran the family like a company, and Danae had grown up understanding that attention was a currency, and that the person holding the camera decided what a moment meant. Rhys mistook her hunger for warmth. For a while, married and young and stationed far away, it almost worked. Then the deployments stacked up, and Danae discovered the internet would give her the thing Cavell never quite had: an audience. It started, as these things do, as something anyone would forgive. A few videos of the kids, Sylvie learning to sign her name. The captions Danae added were sweet. Strangers were kind. Then the channel got a name: Sunny Days with the Marrows, and a schedule, and a look, and Danae's brother Trace, behind a second camera. And somewhere in there, the family stopped filming their life and started living a thing designed to be filmed. Rhys, home for 3 weeks at a time, felt the shift the way he felt a bad splice in a cable. A small heat where there shouldn't be one. He asked Danae to keep Sylvie out of it. Danae said the deaf community stuff was the most important content they made, that they were representation, that Sylvie was helping kids like her feel seen. She said it so smoothly that Rhys, who could take apart a lie in a foreign language, couldn't quite take apart this one in his own living room. He deployed again in the fall. He told himself Sylvie was safe. She had his sister Noelle 20 minutes away. She had her school. She had her hands. He told himself a lot of things you tell yourself when the plane is boarding. The message came at 0300 local, 11 months later. Rhys was in a plywood operations hut with a headset on one ear, running comms for a night movement, when Teddy Kwan slid a phone across the table without a word. Teddy's face was wrong. On the screen was a video, 3 million views, from an account Rhys didn't recognize. A rip, Someone had ripped it off the members page and it had escaped. And the internet was doing what the internet does with something it can't look away from. The basement of the Marrow compound. Bad light, good enough. A short flight of stairs. And his daughter at the top of them. Rhys would spend the rest of his life not describing what happened next, so I won't either, except for the parts that convicted people. Trace was there, big and grinning at the lens the way he grinned at everything. Danae was behind the camera. You could hear her. She was counting. Every time Sylvie went down the stairs, she said a number, bright, delighted, the way you'd count a toddler's steps. And Trace would set her at the top again, and Danae would laugh and say the number. And the comments Rhys could see scrolling were tipping. Little animated coins. Real money. More with every fall. At the bottom, on the 4th number, Sylvie looked straight into the camera. Her hands came up. She was shaking, and her signing was small and fast, and half the internet thought she was just crying with her hands. Rhys read it in a quarter of a second, and it took a piece out of him he never got back. Daddy will find me. Trace stepped on her hand. Deliberate, casual, the way you'd step on a bug you were bored with. And he leaned down into the lens and said the line that the whole ugly clip would be named after. The line that a lawyer would one day read aloud in a courtroom so quiet you could hear the stenographer breathing. Your dad abandoned you. Cry more, sweetheart. It pays. Rhys did not call the police. Not first. He would think about that choice for a long time. He'd been trained to make the first 90 seconds of a disaster count, and his training told him the truth about the next hours. If he called Cavell PD from a base 9 time zones away, a report would be taken. A car might roll by a mansion owned by the most connected family in the county. And by the time anyone with a badge convinced a judge that a viral video was a crime scene, the Marrows, who deleted, edited, and monetized for a living, would have scrubbed every server they owned. Evidence was signal. Signal decayed, and the Marrows were very, very good at making signal disappear. So Rhys did 2 things in the first 90 seconds. He called his first sergeant, Cyril Boaz, a mountain of a man who had buried 2 of his own kids and did not blink at emergencies. And while the phone rang, with his other hand, he opened his laptop and began, quietly, methodically, the way he'd taught 19-year-olds to do it under fire, to save everything. Every copy of the clip, every mirror, the account that posted it, the Sunny Days channel, the members page he'd never had the password to but whose front door was public. He wasn't looking at it as a father anymore, or he was trying not to. He was looking at it as a network, and networks have a shape, and the shape tells you where the money sleeps. Boaz picked up. Rhys told him in 4 sentences. There was a silence, and then Boaz said the only 4 words that mattered. Go. I've got here. The flights took 31 hours. Rhys did not sleep for any of them. Somewhere over the Atlantic, he stopped being afraid and became something colder and more useful. And by the time the wheels touched down in Reno, he had a plan that had nothing to do with his fists, though his fists were ready too. His sister Noelle was waiting at arrivals with her jaw set and her eyes red. She was a paralegal, sharp as a chipped tooth, and she'd spent the 31 hours doing the one thing Rhys had asked, not confronting anyone, just finding Sylvie. It hadn't been hard. The Marrows weren't hiding. That was the part that would take the country a while to understand. They weren't hiding at all. Sylvie was at the compound, on camera, in a video posted 6 hours after the stairs, captioned, "Sis is fine. Haters mad lol." A bag of frozen peas taped to her hand while Trace mugged for the lens. She's got a hairline fracture in 2 fingers, and they've filmed it 4 times, Noelle said in the car, and her voice cracked on filmed. Rhys, what are we doing? Tell me we're not just anything, Rhys said. We're going to do this so it holds. Drive to the hospital, not the compound, the hospital first. Because the first move in taking apart a machine is never the machine. It's the one part the machine can't afford to lose. And the Marrows, for all their servers and shells and lawyers, had made a single catastrophic mistake. They had left the evidence alive. Getting Sylvie was not a rescue. Rhys wanted it to be. He wanted to drive through the front gate and carry his daughter out of that house, and every cell in his body was built to do exactly that. Instead, he sat in a hospital parking lot and made phone calls, because a man who kicks in a door loses his daughter to a custody fight, and a man who walks in with the right paper keeps her. The right paper came from Fola Adebayo. She was a family law attorney Noelle had cold called at 6 in the morning, a woman with a voice like a closing door, who had spent a decade prying children out of powerful homes and had exactly zero patience for the argument that money made a family safe. By noon, she had walked an emergency motion in front of a judge, with the viral clip queued up and a pediatrician's preliminary read on Sylvie's x-rays, and by 2 o'clock, Rhys Denman had temporary emergency custody of his own daughter and a police escort to enforce it, which is a very different thing from a cop rolling past a mansion. Danae met them at the compound gate with a camera. Of course she did. She had done her makeup. She stood in the frame in soft afternoon light and told her 4 million followers that her military husband had come home unstable, that he was traumatized, that he was trying to tear a loving family apart over a joke that the haters had taken out of context. And she cried, and she was good at it, and 40,000 people would leave hearts on the video before the night was over. Trace filmed from the side. Grover Marrow watched from the porch with his arms folded, a man who had never once in his life been made to sit down and wait. Rhys didn't say anything to the camera. He'd been coached by Fola, and by something older than Fola. Never perform for the enemy's platform. He handed the order to the deputy, and the deputy read it, and Danae's performance developed a crack when she realized this wasn't content. This was a court, and inside the house a caseworker named Rennell Fox was already walking toward the room where Sylvie was. Sylvie saw her father through the doorway. Rhys would tell me, later, that this was the moment the cold thing in him almost broke, that he'd held it together across an ocean and a courtroom and a gauntlet of cameras, and it was his 7-year-old's face doing the thing faces do when they've stopped believing in rescue, and then it arrives anyway. She ran. She hit him at the knees, and her hands came up against his chest and made the small fast sign she'd made into the lens on the stairs, except now it had a different tense, and Rhys pressed his forehead to hers and gave her the answer, 3 taps on the back of her hand, quick, like a heartbeat. I found you. They kept the cameras rolling the whole time. That was the thing Rhys couldn't get over, that even now, even as a deputy carried his daughter's overnight bag out to the car, the Marrows were filming, framing, thinking about the edit. It wasn't that they didn't understand what they'd done. It was that they had stopped being able to experience anything that wasn't footage. They had turned their own lives into product so completely that a man taking his abused child home was, to them, simply a very good episode. Rhys buckled Sylvie into the back seat, and she signed a question with her hurt hand held carefully in her lap, and it was the question that decided everything that came after. Are they going to do it to the next one? Rhys had not, until that second, let himself think about a next one. Now he couldn't stop, because a channel like Sunny Days doesn't run on one child. It runs on the promise of more, and the Marrows had cousins, and the network that fed them had other families, other basements, other kids whose worst days were somebody's revenue. He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, 7 years old, 2 fingers taped, asking with her hands whether her suffering was going to be a franchise. No, Rhys signed back. I'm going to turn it off. All of it. And then, because he was still a soldier and soldiers plan, he started to think about how. The hospital gave him the first thread. Dr. Neha Varma was a child abuse pediatrician, which is a specialty most people don't know exists until it saves them, and she did not treat Sylvie's fingers as an isolated event. She ordered a skeletal survey. She read it herself. And when she called Rhys into a small room with a light box, she showed him what a body remembers even when a family edits it away. A healing rib, a months-old fracture in the other wrist, the small, quiet history of a child who had been hurt on a schedule and filmed on a schedule and healed just enough to be hurt again. This isn't an incident, Dr. Varma said. This is a pattern. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Injuries have dates. And if their content has dates too. They have dates on everything, Rhys said slowly. It's a business. Businesses keep records. He drove home from that appointment with the whole shape of it finally clear, and it was worse than he'd feared and better than he'd hoped. Because a pattern is a thing you can prove. 2 timelines that give the same answer are almost impossible to argue with. Bone remembers. A server doesn't lie unless someone makes it, and Rhys knew how to make sure no one got the chance. That night, after Sylvie was asleep in Noelle's spare room with a nightlight shaped like a moon, Rhys called an old number. Isaiah Poe had carried a radio for Rhys in 3 countries before he traded fatigues for a suit and a federal badge. He worked a task force now that most people never hear about until it's on their street. Crimes against children, and the money that moves around them, because Isaiah had learned the same lesson Rhys had. Follow the child, then follow the cash. And the two trails braid together into a rope you can hang a whole organization with. "Talk to me," Isaiah said, and Rhys talked. And when he was done, there was a long breath on the line. "You already saved the public stuff," Isaiah said. It wasn't a question. "Everything I could reach, channel, mirrors, the members' front page, the shell name on their merch store. It's a company called Goldfinch Holdings that cashes the checks. That's not a family. That's a structure. A structure means somebody built it," Isaiah said. "Family vloggers don't set up holding companies to hide ad money. Somebody taught them. Rhys, do not touch that house. I mean it. You go in there and swing, you're a guy with a custody dispute and a temper. And every lawyer they own will bury you and get Sylvie back. Let me get paper. Let me get a warrant that reaches the servers. You built me a map. Let me drive." And Rhys, who had spent his whole career learning that the loudest part of any operation is the discipline before it, said the hardest word he knew. "Okay." But okay is not the same as nothing. Okay just meant the fighting would be quiet for a while. The map got bigger the more Rhys looked at it, and it stopped being about the Marrows. He worked at night, at Noel's kitchen table, with the patience of a man who had once spent 6 weeks characterizing a single enemy radio net one signal at a time. He wasn't hacking anyone. He didn't need to. The Marrows had spent years pouring their entire operation into public view, and Rhys had been trained to find the enemy's order of battle in exactly that kind of exhaust. Who posts when, who tags whom, whose logo appears in the corner of whose video, whose brand deal is really a payment for something else. The logo in the corner was Marigold Media. On the surface, Marigold was a management company for family and kids creators. The kind of agency that promises to handle your brand deals and grow your channel and take the business headaches off your plate. Its founder, Roderick Vale, was a smiling man in expensive glasses who gave talks about authentic family storytelling and had built a stable of 12 channels, all of them featuring children, several of which had, over the years, quietly imploded amid rumors that never went anywhere. Rhys pulled the thread of those dead channels and found a pattern that made his stomach turn. They didn't fail. They were harvested. A channel would grow on a child's ordinary charm, and then Marigold would push the family, gently, with data, with graphs showing exactly which videos performed, toward content that was a little sharper each month, a little crueler, because cruelty retained, and retention was revenue. And when a family finally burned through a child, or a child got too old, or a parent got a conscience, Marigold moved the money into the next shell, and the next family, and the next basement, and the burned-out ones were left holding the shame, while Vale kept the machine. Rhys found the burned-out ones. That was the part Isaiah couldn't do with a warrant, not yet, but a father could do it with a phone and a reason to be believed. Coraline Halliday answered on the 4th ring, and when Rhys said his daughter's name and the words "sunny days," she started to cry before he finished the sentence. 2 years earlier, the Halliday twins had been Marigold's biggest channel. Then it was gone, and Coraline was broke and divorced, and nobody believed her about any of it. Because who believes the mother who let it happen? Rhys believed her. He drove 3 hours to sit at her table and let her talk, and he recorded none of it, because the point wasn't to use her. The point was to learn the machine from someone it had already chewed up. She told him about the milestones Vale set, about the members tier, the vault, they called it internally, where the real money was, where the content was too much for the open platform, where subscribers paid monthly for footage the public never saw. She told him the vault was where Sylvie's stairs had lived before someone ripped it. She told him Vale kept a second set of books because the ad platforms would have banned the channels instantly if they'd seen what the vault held. So Marigold ran the vault on its own private infrastructure, off to the side, invisible. "It's in the house," Coraline said. "They always keep it in the house. The servers, the drives, all of it. Vale makes them keep it close, so no cloud company ever flags it. That's the leash. He tells them it's for their protection. It's really so he can burn it in an afternoon if he ever has to. In the house, in the basement of the Marrow compound, on a stack of drives that could be gone in the time it took to smell a warrant coming. Rhys drove home in the dark and understood the true shape of the problem at last. Isaiah could get a warrant for the Marrows, but the moment that warrant existed, someone, a friendly clerk, a bought deputy, one of Grover's many favors, would whisper, and the vault would go into a fire pit, and Marigold would be a management company with clean hands and a dead channel, and Roderick Vale would give another talk about authentic family storytelling. The evidence and the danger were the same object. To seize it, you had to be inside before anyone knew you were coming, and a warrant, by its nature, announces itself, unless the people in the house invited the whole world in themselves. The idea arrived the way the best ones always did for Rhys, not as a lightning strike, but as a slow recognition that the enemy's greatest strength was a door he'd left unlocked. The Marrows could not stop performing. They filmed everything. Their entire identity, their income, their sense of reality, ran through a live camera and an audience. They had a members-only stream that went out from that basement on a schedule, straight from the machine that held every terrible thing they'd ever made. What if the machine broadcast the truth for once? Rhys took the idea to Isaiah, and to Fola, and to a young woman he had not yet met but was about to, because every machine has someone inside it who is quietly keeping the receipts. And Marigold's was a 19-year-old video editor named Bex Corley. Bex had been hired to cut wholesome family content and had spent a year and a half learning what that phrase actually meant. She was the one who received the raw footage. She was the one told which cruelty to leave in because it tested well. She'd started keeping copies 8 months ago, not because she was brave, but because some animal part of her knew she'd need proof someday, that she'd known, that she hadn't been able to make herself pretend. When Rhys found her, through Coraline, through a careful, quiet week of asking, she didn't run. She'd been waiting for someone to ask her the right question, and the right question was simple. "Do you want to keep being the person who cut it?" Rhys asked her. "Or do you want to be the person who ended it?" Bex gave them the map of the inside of the machine, the stream schedule, the layout of the basement studio, the fact that the vault drives were mirrored to the live rig, a single system, because Vale was cheap and Trace was lazy, which meant the box that broadcast the members' stream was the same box that held every dated, damning file. She gave them the fact that on the first Friday of every month, the Marrows ran a live family Q&A from that basement for their paying subscribers. Cameras hot, doors open to the audience if to no one else. The first Friday was 6 days away, and so Rhys Denman, who had refused to kick in a door, began to plan the one time he would. They spent the 6 days building it like an operation, because it was one. Isaiah's task force could not run a sting on a hunch, but they could be ready to receive evidence, and there is a specific, boring, beautiful legal difference between the two that Fola explained to Rhys twice until he could feel its edges. If the Marrows themselves broadcast a confession and their own footage, live from their own account, to their own audience, that was not the government searching a home. That was a public transmission, freely made, that agents could lawfully capture. And if, in the same window, a warrant already sworn on the medical evidence and the financial structure was executed the instant that transmission began, before anyone in that house could reach for a delete key, then the vault would be seized while it was, quite literally, showing the world what it was. The timing had to be perfect. The trigger had to come from inside, and it could not look like a raid until it was won, or the drives died. Bex was the inside. Rhys was the trigger. Isaiah was the receipt. Rhys spent those 6 days doing 2 other things. He sat with Sylvie every morning and every night, and they signed. And slowly, the small, fast panic in her hands eased into something that could sleep. And he built, on paper and then in his head, until he could walk it blind, the exact geography of the Marrow basement. The door, the bolt, the position of the live rig, the run of the power, the one cable that carried the stream out to 4 million people. He didn't plan to hurt anyone. He planned, if it came to it, to be unhurtable, which is a different thing, and he planned above all to control the one resource the Marrows had never once let out of their grip: the narrative, the edit, the final cut. On the last night, Fola called him and asked the question a good lawyer has to ask. "You know you could hand all of this to Isaiah and stay home," she said. "You don't have to be in that room." "Why do you have to be in that room, Rhys?" Rhys thought about the 4th number. about a small pair of hands coming up into a lens with a message for a father who was too far away to hear it. About 4 million people who had watched his daughter fall and called it a joke, and the smaller, worse number of them who had paid to watch worse. Because she told the camera I'd find her, he said. And the camera's how they hurt her. I'm going to make the camera how it ends. She needs to be able to watch it someday, and know the same eye that filmed the worst thing filmed the last thing. That's not revenge. That's just closing the loop. Fola was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't say anything in there you wouldn't want a jury to hear." "I'm a signals guy," Rhys said. "I never say anything. I let the other side transmit." The first Friday came up hot and clear over Cavell. At 8:58 in the evening, the Marrow compound's basement filled with the specific false brightness of ring lights, and Trace ran a comb through his hair, and Danae checked her lipstick in a phone, and Grover settled into the leather chair he liked because it read as authority on camera, and the live counter for the members' stream began to climb. 2,000, 5, 8, the paying faithful logging on for their monthly hour with America's favorite family. Somewhere in a van 4 blocks away, Isaiah Poe watched the same counter climb on a laptop and put his hand on the door handle. Somewhere upstairs, a 19-year-old editor named Bex Corley pretended to fix a lighting glitch and, with hands that shook only a little, unlocked a door she had been told to keep locked. And Rhys Denman, who had crossed an ocean for this, walked down a short flight of stairs into the room where his daughter had been made into a product, and reached back and slid the bolt closed behind him. For a second, nobody understood what they were looking at. On the stream, 4 million subscribers saw a man walk into frame, tall, calm, dressed like nothing, holding nothing. Trace half rose, grinning by reflex, already narrating. "Whoa. Okay, we got a visitor, guys." Danae's face did something complicated as she recognized her husband. Grover's hand moved, slow, toward the console, toward the one button that mattered. Rhys had already unplugged it, not the stream, the kill switch. He'd found it in the geography in his head, the fat red emergency stop the Marrows used to cut a broadcast if a moment got away from them, and he'd pulled its cable on the way in, so that the one thing they could not do, now, was stop transmitting. "Leave it running," Rhys said quietly. He wasn't talking to them. He was talking to the 4 million. "You paid to watch. Watch." What happened in that basement over the next 11 minutes has been described by a lot of people, most of whom weren't there. Here is what actually happened, because I think it matters that people know it wasn't what the Marrows tried to claim. Rhys did not touch anyone, at first. He stood between the family and the machine, and he talked to the audience, and he told them the truth in the flat, exact voice of a man reading coordinates. He told them the little girl they'd watched fall down the stairs was named Sylvie, that she was deaf, that the sign she'd made into the lens was "Daddy will find me," and that he had. He told them about the vault they'd been paying for. He told them the drives holding every one of those videos were in this room, right now, on the same machine sending them this picture, and that in about 90 seconds it would not belong to this family anymore. Trace lunged then. He was bigger than Rhys, and used to being the biggest thing in any basement, and he came across the room fast with his hand already balling into the fist that had stepped on a child's fingers. Rhys put him on the floor. I'm not going to dress it up, because Rhys never did. It was 2 movements. Economical. The kind of thing 14 years teaches your body so your mind can stay somewhere else. Trace's own weight did most of it. He went down hard against the base of the very stairs he'd used, and the wind went out of him, and he stayed down. And the 4 million people watching a live stream saw the man who'd said "Cry more, it pays discover," on camera, in his own studio, what the floor felt like from Sylvie's height. Rhys never hit him again. He didn't need to. He'd made his point to the only witness that ever mattered to this family, the lens. And then the door at the top of the stairs came off its hinges, because that was the 90 seconds, and Isaiah Poe came down into the light, with a warrant in his hand, and 6 people behind him, and Grover Marrow reached one last time for a delete key that federal fingers closed over first. The stream stayed live for another 90 seconds before someone thought to cut it. It was enough. 4 million people watched the seizure tags go on the drives. They watched Danae stop performing, finally, all the way, her face emptying out into the plain animal fear of someone who has just understood that the audience was never her friend. They watched agents carry the machine up the stairs. The last thing the members of Sunny Days with the Marrows ever saw on their beloved channel was a federal evidence sticker being pressed onto the side of a server, and a man's voice, off camera, saying, "Bag the whole rig. It's all one system." Rhys was already gone up the stairs by then, because he'd promised Fola he'd be the first one out, and the quietest one there, and because there was nothing in that basement he wanted. He'd gotten what he came for the moment the kill switch failed. He'd taken the one thing the Marrows had never surrendered in their entire performing lives. He'd gotten the last word, and he'd made them broadcast it themselves. The unwinding took a year, and it took down more than a family. The drives were everything Dr. Varma's X-rays had promised, and worse. A dated, sortable, exhaustive record. Because a business keeps records, and the Marrows had kept theirs meticulously so Marigold could tell them which cruelty performed. Bex Corley's saved copies matched them file for file, which meant no one could claim the government had fabricated a thing. Two timelines that gave the same answer. The medical calendar and the content calendar laid over each other like a fingerprint. Detective Cassidy Vall of the Cavell PD, a 15-year veteran who had genuinely believed she'd seen the bottom of what people did to kids, sat in a conference room for 2 days building the timeline, and Rhys was told, he wasn't there for it, that on the second afternoon, writing out the injury dates against the upload dates, her hands started to shake so badly, she had to put the pen down and leave the room for a while. She came back. People like her always come back. But she never forgot the shape of that page. Roderick Vale was the real prize, and Isaiah's task force took him apart with the same patience Rhys had used to find him. The financial structure Rhys had spotted from a merch store shell, Goldfinch Holdings, turned out to be one of 9. A laundry that moved vault subscriptions and ad revenue through a dozen family channels and out into Vale's accounts. The dead channels, the harvested kids, the Hallidays and the others. They weren't rumors anymore, they were counts. Vale's talks about authentic family storytelling were entered into evidence next to spreadsheets that priced children's suffering by the retained minute. He did not smile in his glasses at sentencing. Trace Marrow was convicted of enough that the number of years stopped meaning anything. Danae, the counting voice, the laugh, the one who had learned her own daughter's language and used it as a hook, was convicted too. And the thing that seemed to undo her most, in the end, was not the prison term, but the discovery that the audience she'd built her whole self on turned on her in an afternoon and never looked back. Grover's connections got him nothing. It turns out the favors that protect a mansion evaporate the moment a federal seal hits the front page. Even the platform's own trust and safety man, a smiling employee named Dallas Reeve who had personally kept the Sunny Days channel monetized through 40 ignored reports because it was, in his words in an email, a top 50 earner, lost his job, and then a great deal more. And Bex Corley, 19, who had cut the cruelty and then couldn't pretend, testified for 3 days, and then went to school for something clean, and Rhys made sure the record showed she was the reason it held. She'd asked for nothing. He gave her the truth anyway, because he'd learned from the Marrows exactly what happens to people who let a story get edited to serve the powerful, and he refused to be them even a little. Sylvie healed. Fingers first, which was quick, and the rest of it slower, the way the rest of it always is. She got a school for deaf kids 2 towns over, and a therapist who signed, and a father who did not deploy again. Boaz saw to that, and the army, for all its bluntness, knows what to do with a soldier who is the only safe adult a child has left. Rhys took a job doing the boring thing he was best at, keeping networks alive for a hospital system, home every night. And if you drove past their little house in the evening, you might see, through the window, a man and a girl at a kitchen table talking with their hands, laughing at jokes that mean nothing to anyone but them. There is one more thing, and then I'll let it be. A few months after the trial, when Sylvie was old enough to ask, and steady enough to hear the answer, she asked her father to tell her what happened in the basement. Not the fall. She remembered the fall. The other thing, the last time the family was ever on their channel. She'd heard kids at school talk about it. She wanted to know from him. So Rhys told her, in their language, all of it, the true flat version, no dressing. And when he was done, Sylvie was quiet for a while, thinking the way she thought, and then she signed a question that her father would carry for the rest of his life. Did they hear me? She asked. On the stairs. When I said you'd find me. Did anybody hear me? And Rhys, who had spent his whole career being the man who heard the signal everyone else missed, took his daughter's healed hand in both of his and gave her the truest answer he had. 4 million people, he signed. 4 million people heard you. And then your dad turned their own camera around and made every one of them watch him keep the promise. She thought about that, and then she smiled and made the small sign into his chest. 3 taps, quick, like a heartbeat you can pass between palms. Okay, that's the end of the story part. Let me sit here with you for a second, because I don't want to leave it on the trial and walk away. I think the reason this one got under my skin is that it isn't really a story about a bad family. Bad families have always existed. It's a story about incentives. Somewhere out there, right now, a platform is paying more for a child's tears than for her laughter. Not because anyone decided to be evil, but because a machine measured what holds your attention, and a machine cannot tell the difference between compelling and wrong. That's the quiet horror underneath the loud one. The Marrows didn't wake up monsters. They followed a number, and the number led them down a flight of stairs. And there was money at the bottom of it, every single time. What I love about Rhys, and it's why I told you at the start this wasn't really about cruelty, is that he understood you don't beat a machine by being angrier than it. You beat it by understanding it better than the people running it do. He could have flown home and put his hands on Trace in the driveway and been completely justified and completely finished, custody gone, daughter back in that house, the vault burned. Instead, he did the harder, colder thing. He treated a monster like a network, found where its money slept, and then used the machine's own deepest compulsion, the need to broadcast, to make it testify against itself in front of the exact audience it had been performing for. That's not just revenge. That's poetry, with a warrant attached. And the deaf piece matters, so let me say it plainly. Sylvie's first language is her hands, and the people who were supposed to protect that language turned it into a bit. When she signed "Daddy will find me" into that lens, the cruelty was double. They didn't just hurt her. They used the most intimate thing she had, her way of speaking, as content. The reason Rhys's ending is the right one is that he gave her language back its power. The last time those hands were on a screen, they weren't a joke or a hook. They were 3 taps that meant "I love you," and 4 million people had to sit and understand that they'd been on the wrong side of a little girl the whole time. If you take one thing from this, take this. Be careful what you watch, because watching is a vote, and every vote is $1, and somewhere a family is doing math on your attention. Protect the kids who can't turn the camera off themselves. And if you ever meet a quiet man who notices the boring parts, the wiring, the money, the dates, do not mistake his patience for weakness. Sometimes the person who refuses to look away from the details is the only one who ever actually finds you. I'm Nathan. Thanks for staying to the end. Take care of each other.